Okay, so thank you for coming along to Business Premium, a smarter use of your IT budget webinar. The session is being recorded and the slides and the recording will be sent to you afterwards, so don't worry if you need to get that later on. Any questions, please pop them in the Q&A or in the chat box. But also if you think you have any questions afterwards, then of course, please speak to your account manager. But I don't want to chat loads, so I'm going to hand over to James, who is a modern workplace specialist. So thank you, James.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for being with us today. I am just going to share some slides with you all as they appear to have dropped off the screen momentarily, but hopefully you can all see that now. But today we're going to be going through a bit of an agenda for you first before we dive into some of the Microsoft 365 Business Premium related content. So we're going to start off with a bit of an overview around Business Premium itself, some of the challenges that businesses are facing today, the importance of security in modern work environments, some of the key solutions that are offered by Microsoft 365 Business Premium, some case studies, some real world applications and things so you can see how some of those features work and how they obviously help solve real world problems. And then we've got some conclusions, some next steps, takeaways, that sort of thing for you at the end. So we're going to start off with the challenges aspect of that we were just looking at there, and looking at some of the things that we tend to find more often than not from Microsoft's end, and kind of the reach and the scale of the data and information that they have available to them. I'm going to use a little bit of a swear word and say that the COVID-19 pandemic and bring that back up again. But back then, it obviously changed the way that everybody pretty much in the world works now. It involved a lot more people working from home, working remotely, and obviously it brought in a lot of additional challenges and changes to people's traditional hardware purchases and things of that nature. So there became a very much like a new norm, shall we say, during that time. And these were kind of the three critical areas that came about as a consequence of that, and this is something that's continued, and we're still seeing those trends even 5 years later, and that's the real-time collaboration, the security, and the cost aspect. So this comes back to people's needs to be able to get work done from virtually anywhere in the world anymore. Changes that have happened in team culture as well, the ways that people interact with each other, how many people sit in the same office these days and use a Teams message across the office rather than what you would have done of getting up and walking across the room and speaking to someone. So it's very much changed how people interact, the way that a team's culture, even inside of a company, works. But obviously, the collaboration aspect means that people, as I said, do need to be able to work from anywhere in the world at any time. So whether they're working from a train station, a coffee shop, the airport, they're working from home, wherever that may be, businesses need to be able to collaborate on documents. They need to be able to speak to one another, talk to one another, message each other. And that's a real challenge that businesses are obviously facing. As a part of that is people's ability to do that from anywhere. We've then got the security aspect. So it's amazing that people can collaborate from anywhere, anytime, across multiple different platforms. But the security aspect that comes into this is the way people are able to potentially gain access to that data in a malicious manner, shall we say. So the risk of cyber attacks and phishing threats rose 65% in the last 12 months for SMBs, which is a considerable amount at 65%. And that was employees using a lot of, in instances, free consumer solutions with minimal security is what we tend to see. And that's what's driving this rise is small and medium businesses don't have the budgets of enterprise businesses, and as a consequence of that, they are becoming more and more targeted by these businesses. And then obviously, last up, we've got cost in there as well. So obviously, buying a whole plethora of different solutions from various different vendors, etc., comes with, as the saying says at the bottom there, mixed environments add complexity. Legacy solutions don't solve the challenges. So that's buying multiple things, relying on old systems, which tend to, in the end, probably cost more than what buying the new solutions will be. And hopefully we'll touch on some of those and how we can, support collaboration, support the security aspect and potentially bring in the cost savings aspect there as well as a consequence of that. But continuing just to talk about security being top of mind, this slide basically underscores the urgency of addressing security in a rapidly changing work environment. And as we go through the presentation, just one thing I do want you to think about is that little comment you've got on the left-hand side there. So employees are working from more locations than ever, as we've touched on the previous slide. are you confident that your data is safe? So think about that from the perspective of if you've got colleagues which are potentially working from coffee shops, airports, working from home, how much confidence do you have that the data that they work on day to day is completely secure? That's one of the questions I want you to think about as we do go through this. And then some of the stats to the right hand side there to touch on for you. Over 300% of ransomware attacks in the past, a 300% increase in ransomware attacks in the past year, with more than 50% targeted at SMBs. Now, obviously, we mentioned on the previous slide about the 65% increase. Now, obviously, this is looking at it specifically from ransomware attacks and how much that increase has been targeted towards and shifted towards the SMB audience. 1 in 4, so that's of medium businesses, state that they had a security breach in the last year. So 1 in 4 businesses saying they've had that security breach in the last 12 months. And one of the things to remember there as well is that's 1 in 4 small businesses that have actually reported this, that are actually aware that this has happened. You wouldn't believe the amount of instances that we do have this where people simply aren't aware that they've had a security breach until, anywhere up to a year after it's happened in a lot of instances. And there's also a lot of instances where it isn't reported. They don't say we've had a security breach, etc., due to the potential damage to brand, damage to reputation, relationships, and so on and so forth. And then we've got on there over 70% think cyber threats are becoming more of a business risk. So that's a lot more people are waking up to the fact of we need to have these tools that Business Premium will bring in play as a part of our business plan. And then at the bottom there, finally, the cost associated with an SMB data breach. Now, this number varies wildly depending on whose perspective you look at. Now, $108,000 is one of the lower estimates that I have seen on this. If you look at a recent IBM report, they quote anywhere up to $1 million for an SMB data breach. So again, there's very different ways of how that's calculated. So there's things to take into consideration there from reputational damage, potential downtime of a business. You've got it from the perspective of, as I said a minute ago, brand damage, but also it's that future earnings that you could potentially take away from the business as well. A really good example here is the Marks and Spencer's one that happened not too long ago. Now, obviously, that Marks and Spencer's breach happened via a third-party avenue, so they used another business to gain access into the Marks and Spencer systems. And as I'm sure you can appreciate, it's probably not a relationship that survived the outcome of what happened there. So it's very important that a lot of businesses look at it from the perspective of we may not be the target, we are just the avenue and the outlet to get to a potentially bigger target. And again, that is another reason that we're seeing these increases affecting SMBs. But bringing this into Microsoft 365 for you and looking at Business Premium, which is what we're here to talk about. So the key differentiator from the Business Basics and the Business Standard licenses is those 7 little icons you see at the bottom there in that box. And these are the parts that make up the Business Premium, being the hero product, as we call it at Microsoft. Now, what those pieces are for you is, if I bring them up and load them a little bit bigger, Microsoft Intune, information protection, conditional access, we've got Azure Virtual Desktop, Defender for Business, Defender for Office 365, and we have got Cloud App Security. Now, we are going to delve into all of those in individual pieces, but the crux of the topic here is it's bringing device management, data security, device security, and collaboration security all into your normal overall license, shall we say, of Business Premium. There is also on there the Azure Virtual Desktop aspect, which just allows you to bring your own operating system and access remote virtual computers in the cloud as a part of something known as Azure from Microsoft. But first things first, one of the things I do like to touch on for people is MFA, multi-factor authentication. Now, I'm sure many of you on the call will use this in some way, shape or form. Many of you will use it in the day-to-day without even realizing that you're doing it. So multi-factor authentication is basically when you go to log into a system, it asks for a second form of identification to be provided. So look at this from an example of, I'm sure many of you will log on to your online banking at home. It'll ask you for your username and your password, and then it will follow that up with saying, we'll send you a code via text. Can you take that 6-digit code in for us? So that is a form of multi-factor authentication. Now, when it comes to your Windows environment, a lot of people will have the Microsoft Authenticator app, where you'll have a little 2-digit code pop up in the middle of the screen that you have to type in on your phone inside the application, or you have to open your application and hit approve inside of it to state that it is you. That's again the kind of one of the forms of multi-factor authentication that's available. You'll see from the screen there's various different ways this can be done. Hard tokens, you can have it as SMS, biometrics, and Windows Hello, etc. Windows Hello being your facial recognition, biometrics being your fingerprint aspect. So there's various different ways that this can be set up. One of the really, really important things that Business Premium brings into play for you, though, is that ability to start using what's known as passwordless technology. So a password, traditionally, it's something that let's say on average about 10 characters long. Most people, it's I'm not going to say worthless, but it's not something that you can tangibly hold as an item in front of you. So it's something that can be guessed. It is something that you can be, let's say, in essence, tricked into giving away by a potentially malicious party. However, flip side of that for you, if it's passwordless, not something that can be guessed, and it is something that you physically earn. So look at this from the perspective of it being your facial recognition. Your face isn't something you can give away. Your fingerprint isn't something you can give away. Using the Microsoft Authenticator app built into your mobile phone, again, a mobile phone isn't something you're just going to hand over to somebody and give away, is it? So these are all forms of identification and means of access that people can't guess. People can't sit there and try and brute force attack these sorts of methods. So again, bringing in a lot more security and bringing in a lot more ways and means basically of stopping these attacks. And as you'll see on the right hand side there, simply having MFA on your account can make it so that 99% less likely to be compromised as a method of breaching your system, basically. So it stops these identity attacks through strong authentication methods. So moving on there now, it's going to start going into some of these challenges and then the solution that would fix those challenges. All of these kind of challenges that pop up, they all use a fictitious business, which we call Northwind Traders, and it'll obviously give you some of their staff and ways and means and things that they're trying to do as a consequence of that. So it'll go through these now for a whole plethora of those different features that we looked at on the previous slides. So first off, we're looking at unauthorized access to work data, and this is using a piece of the Business Premium license, which is known as Entra ID. Now, Entra ID is all about your identity. So this is all about your users, their identities, their passwords, what they do and don't have access to, and how they can access that information. So in this scenario, we've got Northwind Traders. Employees need to access work data as they work from home or on the go. However, there's bad actors outside of their circle of trust, that corporate network, which are trying to gain access to the work information. For example, stealing passwords and trying to gain access to work data, from potentially from another country outside of the UK, let's say in this instance. So how we would rectify that as a part of Business Premium and the Entra ID aspect of this would be to look at applying some advanced multi-factor authentication and conditional access policies. So when we call these conditional access policies, basically what these are doing is dictating in what scenarios it would force us to use a multi-factor authentication. As we touched on the previous slide, MFA being text message code to your phone, a push notification into your application on your mobile phone, for instance. So in this scenario, somebody's potentially trying to maliciously gain access to our data from somebody that's working remote, and they're trying to do that from, let's say, for instance, let's say Germany, Romania, anywhere you want in the world sort of situation. What it will do is saying, because we're recognizing you as trying to access this data from another country, you have to MFA. You can't just log in using your password like you do at home. We mean that you have to go in there and you have to provide that 2-digit code from your mobile application, or you have to provide the 6-digit code that's been texted to you or called with, etc. as a part of that. So again, various different ways that can be set up, but it will force them to MFA as a part of that process. Basically meaning that stops them in their tracks almost straight off the back. And they can no longer access the system because you're not going to give them the 6-digit code and you're not going to give them the 2-digit code or approve them from within your application. It's going to flag it to you and say, this isn't you as a user trying to log into that system. So you're going to be well aware of those scenarios. So again, you've stopped them accessing your work data. Now, These conditional access policies can be set up for a whole host of different things. They can be set up so that anybody who's an administrator, so they have high level access to a lot of systems, a lot of data, passwords, and your back end security and administration centers. You can make it so they have to MFA every single time they log in, no matter where they log in from. There's a lot of things you can do with this. It's got a lot of flexibility to it, and it's all aimed at improving scenarios where somebody could potentially be trying to log in and gain access to, your sensitive data as a consequence of that. So again, peace of mind when your data's out there that, people aren't accessing it unless they are who they say they are. So next up, we've got here what is known as Defender for Office 365. Now, this is, again, part of your business premium stack, and this is all aimed primarily at your email security. There is more advanced versions of this that are available as well, which also brings security into your Microsoft Teams environment, but that doesn't sit within the business premium stack. So this is purely looking at it from your Outlook and the emails that will come within that area. So again, Northwinds being our fictitious business, the employees receive an email with a link to a secure document. They believe it to be from a very well-known source. They've got no reason to think it's anything untowards. So they click on the link, loads up, enter their credentials to view the document. However, the document fails to load. The employee thinks, it's just a glitch, must be my internet connection, goes about their other business and thinks I'll come back to that later. So they go move on to another task, go make a cup of coffee, whatever it is that they're going to do as a part of that. Now, while they've been doing that in the background, the potentially malicious individuals have switched that link in the background. So that link is no longer taking them to a safe location. And as a consequence, that username and password that they typed in have been sent straight away to the malicious party, who now have access to your online accounts, your data, your password, and everything else that they would potentially want to lay their hands on. Now, as a part of Defender for Office 365, what it would do is it would utilize something that is known as safe clicks and time of click protection to check on that link before it was clicked. Now, what we mean when we say all of that is that when you come in, click on the link, straight off the back, Microsoft are going to check that link. Is that link taking us to the genuine location we believe it to be? So if that link says in there, let's say, for instance, it is a Microsoft 365 link to open up a shared document or something that a potential vendor may have shared with you, you go in, click the link, type your details in, and it's taking you to the wrong place. However, that URL destination is going to open that in a sandbox environment first, where it can check it is exactly what it says on the tin. So is that taking us to our vendor's Microsoft site? Is that taking us to, our Asda shopping page, for instance? Something as bizarre as that. It's going to be checking on, excuse me, sorry, all of that information. So in that safe environment, it's opening that link up and checking it. Does this in seconds. You wouldn't have even known that has happened. When we say time of click protection, as I mentioned a moment ago, and you'll see it there on the screen, what this basically means is every time you press the link, it's running that check. As I said on the previous slide, they can switch the links in the background. You wouldn't know that it's happened. And the first time you click on it, it's safe. But the second time you click on it, it isn't safe. And in those scenarios, that's where time of click protection would come in to support you by supporting the checking of that link in the sandbox environment every single time you click on it. As a part of that as well, you'll see we've got anti-spoofing technologies that are a part of that, which tend to come more into when you've got attachments in here as well. So that would support by opening those attachments in that same sandbox environment and checking that the attachments are what they say they are, and also looking for other things that could potentially be malicious within the text, the body text of that email, such as, unknown, or should we say potentially malicious email domains that crop up in there where it's been sent from. All that sort of stuff is it's going to be looking for. And then this incorporates itself with your multi-factor authentication aspect as well by enforcing MFA for people that potentially have the right to be able to override these notifications. And the next up, we have got what is known as data loss protection using information protection. Now, this is a family of products from Microsoft, which is known as Purview, which was recently rebranded. And this basically covers everything that sits under data protection. So this is protecting documents, sensitive information, documents that have been created and documents that are yet to be created even. So Northwind uses occasionally a password on an Excel spreadsheet to guard sensitive information such as salaries. But these security measures are used inconsistently. Lots of the documents are emailed around or saved on USB sticks without any level of protection whatsoever. So anyone could download a confidential document and potentially leave the company. So there's potential data leaks that are going to happen straight off the back there. So how Business Premium and utilising this information protection aspect of this within the Pairview family of products is, we've got the scenario here of Adrian creates the company's sales forecast for the next 12 months, and it classifies it as highly confidential, which is part of the labeling system within the information protection. So as Northwinds Traders is now using the Business Premium licenses, that highly confidential file is basically now automatically encrypted. So, and it's only accessible to company employees. So if you're outside of that corporate framework, you don't have corporate login credentials, you're very much not going to be able to access that document anymore. So Laura, who's a Northwind Trade salesperson, attempts to open the file. Her Microsoft 365 Business Premium verifies that she is an employee and decrypts the file and allows her to access it. Again, this is all taking seconds for all of this sort of action to take place. Even if, in this instance, Laura leaves the company and stores the document on a personal device or a USB stick, they cannot access the document when they plug it in on their home device because they no longer have work credentials, so they're no longer part of that corporate framework, and as a consequence, that basically just becomes a useless document now, unless somebody with corporate information relogs into the 365 environment and then opens up the document accordingly. So that document, as I said, just becomes completely useless. It's heavily encrypted and can no longer be accessed by anybody outside of the Northwinds trade team's corporate framework. So document is secure even though it's left the business, even though it's on a USB stick, it's been put on somebody's personal laptop. Again, document is completely secure and protected and cannot be opened. This also can apply to not just Excel documents. This can be done against Word documents, PowerPoint presentations, and so on and so forth. So any document style you would create from your normal Microsoft 365 apps can all be certified in this way. There is also something known as data loss prevention that comes into play here as well, which can basically mean that as you start creating documents and you type things in, such as names, maybe passport numbers, credit card numbers, anything of that type, Microsoft's system will automatically see that information being typed in there, and based on how confident it is that that information is a credit card number, is a passport number, maybe is a name and an address, it will classify that document automatically with a level of confidentiality that you dictate. So in short, as these documents are being created, it will auto label the document rather than you having to rely on somebody manually applying these labels. Idea being there is it just makes sure every document comes with a label on it. You can also set it so people can manually assign the labels for themselves. So if it was myself, I could, for instance, in this PowerPoint presentation we're looking at here, label that as highly confidential for internal purposes only. Or I could create it as a public facing document, in which case it can go to anybody and anybody can open it, and it lessens that level of encryption requirements or removes it entirely, and that's kind of your own prerogative to do within your systems. And moving on there, as it said, data loss prevention and looking at some of the pieces that come as a part of that. If this is something you're interested in looking at, we can do a deep dive into this sort of thing and kind of do it one-to-one for you as well, so you can see exactly how it works, how it's set up, and kind of what settings and features are available as a part of the Microsoft pre-existing catalogs for these sorts of things. Really nice little stat in the bottom there though. 55% of SMBs say they are concerned about employees leaving their company with data or personal devices. And the personal devices piece sits in nicely for us talking about our next piece on there, which is Microsoft Intune. Intune is something that we talk about a lot because it's so interesting to people at the moment, given the amount of people that are out there working remotely in the world. We've got another scenario in this one, which is a Northwind Traders marketing manager is using her personal phone to check a company email. So she receives a confidential email with a business plan and she saves it into her Dropbox, her personal storage Dropbox for later. Does this by accident, nothing malicious about it. However, it is now a data breach. That data is no longer controllable by the business, and it is outside that corporate framework, that corporate network, that the data can be deleted, can be updated, etc. Breaching many GDPRs and similar, as I'm sure many of you would know. However, because the device is set up using what is known as Microsoft Intune, what it would allow us to do is stop that document being saved on those personal storage locations. So even though this is a personal device that belongs to the individual, what it allows them to do is, in essence, put Chinese firewall, box these two pieces of the device off. So we have managed apps at the top, which is all the corporate stuff, the things that a business would care about. That's your work email, it's your sales plan, it's your marketing presentation, what's saved in your OneDrive that's been shared around the business, potentially confidential stats and statistics and customer information, for example, all sits in that top box, which is known as managed apps. The second part, personal apps. It's your Netflix, it's your Facebook, it's your emails, your browser, your personal Dropbox storage, all that sort of stuff. No access to it whatsoever. That's yours. We can't see it. We don't know what's there. And the system has no interest in understanding what's there. The only bit we have access to, the only bit we care about is the managed applications aspect. And by having everything in that box, it basically means that in this scenario, had the employee opened up that work email with the attachment and gone to save it on their Dropbox with malicious intentions or even innocently, it would have blocked them from doing that. It would say that isn't something that you can do as an action. However, you can save it to your work OneDrive account and save it there and look at it later from there. So again, giving them the option to keep it inside the framework rather than taking it outside of that corporate environment. Again, just offering additional protection to this. It would also stop them from saving it on the devices, data drives. It would stop them putting it in, maybe a Google storage account, anything of that nature. It would stop all of that sort of thing from happening. So sensitive work data stays in the work environment and can't be saved outside of it in a scenario like this, which is what's known as bring your own device, or BYOD in most instances. Now, Intune does also work for corporately owned devices. So if you've got a work mobile phone, a work laptop, a work iPad, a tablet of some form, Intune also works alongside them. However, because it's a corporately owned device, Intune gets access to everything on the device. Rather than having this segregated personal applications perspective, it has access to everything. Also comes with some really nice features to be able to remote wipe it, remote lock it, etc. If that device gets left on a train or lost, for example, it allows them to again be able to remote wipe the device and potentially stop any security breaches that could come off the back of that. So some really powerful features there. Again, one-to-one sessions available on this type of thing if it is of interest for you. So do feel free to reach out to your account managers here at Cobweb. Next up, Cloud App Discovery, and this is the last one before we look at endpoint protection and finish up for you all here. But Cloud App Discovery is a really, really powerful one. This covers off something which is known as shadow IT, which is not something people come across very often. But in the terms of shadow IT, what we're basically referencing there is people using applications that the business doesn't know about and isn't basically paying for. So really good example of this would be, we work on Microsoft 365, so we have SharePoints and OneDrives, PowerPoint presentations and things like that. And I work in marketing, let's say that as an example. And in this scenario, I'm saving all of our marketing assets to a Google Drive account. I used to use Google Drive where I worked previously, and I'm saving everything into Google. However, that Google account is owned by me personally. It's not owned by the business. The business has no access to that information, that data, etc. in there. It's a potential security breach. Now, as a consequence of that, they would be able to use Cloud App Discovery to see that I was sending vast amounts of data over to that third-party application. And as a consequence of that, they can then educate me to say, you shouldn't be doing that. We don't use it. It's a security risk. Take that data. Let's make sure it all comes back to us. And we're going to put that for you in your OneDrive account and teach you how to use OneDrive as an example. Now, this isn't the only scenario of this. You could be looking at it from a perspective of there's a lot of data going out to potential social media channels. Maybe there's a lot of data going out to different AI platforms, all of that sort of stuff. So it'll give you a really good overview of where your data is going and where people are sending, potentially large packets of information and data to, and ensuring that people are utilizing safe, secure, corporately owned applications, shall we say, as a part of that. The screenshot here is not very big, but it gives a really good example of another one there, which is a product known as Mega, which is like a Dropbox cloud storage option that's available out there, except it's very open. So you save something in there, and anybody can pretty much go view it, even though you believe it to be a secure environment. So again, it'll flag up in red on them lines and say this is something that needs to be looked at and addressed. It's not, a recognized safe application. So go check it out, see who's doing it, see where that data is going, and let's make sure it gets locked down and secured for yourselves. So again, really powerful tools there, and it lets you look at it from just a data perspective, a user perspective, and comes with a lot of additional tools there for you. So last bit on the piece here for you is Microsoft Defender for Business. Now, Microsoft Defender for Business is very much just a endpoint security solution. I say just, it comes with a lot of bells and whistles included in there for it. But basically what Microsoft did was recognize that there was an increase in attacks on SMBs, the exact same attacks that were taking place on large enterprise businesses. And as a consequence of that, decided they needed to bring something to market which would protect an SMB, the same as it protects an enterprise business. However, without the associated costs that go with that, SMBs aren't going to be able to afford the same level of protection as an enterprise business. Microsoft saw this as a gap in the market and basically came up with what is known as Microsoft Defender for Business. Now, what Microsoft Defender for Business does is, as it says, enterprise grade protection coming down to the SMB market. And this is what is known as an EDR solution, which stands for Extended Detection and Response. And the idea being here is it will offer the devices protection 24/7. So whether you're on the device, whether the device is being left on in the office, 24/7, 365 days a year, it will take action to protect the device should somebody find a way around the traditional level of protection that Defender for Business comes with. So that will take action, it will stop an attack, and then it will provide reporting back to you to say, this is what the attack was, this is how it happened, this is where it went, and allow people to do remedial work the following morning for you, in short. So offers a really good level of protection there, and this is something that you can take even further and bring even more features and functionality in. But this is basically giving you what would be viewed as an entry level enterprise security package as a part of that. Now, this is the exact same endpoint protection that you'll get from a E5 license, which is nearly 3 times the price of a business premium license, but brings you the same endpoint protection that comes as a part of that. The E5 license does come with some additional pieces in there, but it's mainly aimed around server protection and data retention, which is not something that we see in the SMB space as a high level requirement. But to touch on this from a challenge perspective, for Northwind traders again for you here. So ransomware. During the busiest time of year, Northwind traders' mission-critical files became unusable. So hackers used ransomware to encrypt Northwind's files and demanded a payment for the encryption key. So Northwind must either pay up or lose their data, which could result in the business's closure as a consequence of that. Now, I'm sure many of you will remember this sort of attack taking place on the NHS quite some time ago, where they locked them out of all their systems and everybody got a message on the screen saying pay X numbers of thousands of pounds and we'll give you your data back. Important thing to remember here is when you pay these ransoms, or should you pay these ransoms, you don't get to dictate what form your data comes back in. So it was taken in one way. It doesn't mean it's going to come back looking exactly the same. So more often than not, you will find that files come back partially corrupted. They come back in different orders. There's no way of knowing where that document belonged, where it was saved previously. So just an important thing to remember there that, paying these ransoms, you don't dictate how, when, and where that data comes back. But using Business Premium license and your Defender for Business license that comes within that, the devices were protected with features like Defender for Business, which provided multi-layer protection. So with threat and vulnerability management, they basically thwarted the attack before they could even occur. And the EDR solution, that extended detection and response, and the automated investigation aspect of that basically defended against the manual and targeted aspects of that. So they got in the system, they corrupted files, they accessed a certain document. However, Defender for Business was able to stop them in their tracks, get them out of the system, and roll back versions of the files that was already in there. So they was able to basically make sure that those files were going to be usable the next morning for staff when that attack took place overnight. So, as again, touching on Business Premium, it would have protected against this in 3 primary ways. Email would have opened up in a sandbox environment, utilizing that safe links for the untrusted sender. The protection against the targeted ransomware attack using those EDR tools we just spoke about. And then you have your automated investigation and response aspect of the Defender for Business, which would have provided a post-breach protection file, a recovery file, for your OneDrive for Business environment. So those files that weren't available would become available almost immediately again to you using those rollback features. And Defender for Business is so good because it can be used across platform as well. So you don't just have to have this on your laptop. You can have it on your Mac. You can have it on your iOS devices, so your iPhones, your iPads, your Android devices, and it will work in those virtual desktop environments as well. So if you are using virtual machines or Windows 365 machines, they have access for Defender for Business being set up in all of them as well. And one of the last things I want to touch on for you as well is a lot of people don't really recognize Microsoft as a security vendor. So one of the things we like to touch on is just a little bit of an understanding as to, how much of a security vendor Microsoft actually is. So Microsoft is actually the largest security vendor in the world. In terms of their scale of investment that they put into it, it's pretty much unparalleled among anybody else. Over the last 5 years, they actually put about £5 billion into their security infrastructure and investment. And some of the stats and third-party certifications you're seeing on the screen here are a testament to that level of investment that they put in there. So AV-Test, which is a third-party accreditation company, scoring them 6 out of 6. AV Comparatives, another third-party company, giving them a score of 99.7%. SE Labs giving them their highly coveted AAA award, and then MITRE have seen them as an industry leader in terms of optics and detection capabilities. And if we start looking at things similar to the IDC MarketScape, you'll see among all of the well-known vendors that are out there doing cybersecurity, Microsoft are pretty much up there and viewed as leaders within the SMB space for modern endpoint security solutions. So it really is something that Microsoft invested heavily in, and they put a lot of time, a lot of effort and energy into this sort of thing. And in terms of the scale that Microsoft have access to information for these sorts of tools, it's one of those things that's pretty much unraveled. If you think of all the data points Microsoft can access, daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, it gives them a very, very good picture of exactly what's going on in terms of the cybersecurity landscape. And that was everything we had today for you all. We'll just have a moment, see if there's anything in the Q&A at all there.
Always a good sign if there isn't. Shows that you've covered everything. There's nothing at the moment. Thank you so much, James. That was a deep dive into Business Premium. I also believe that Microsoft's just released some add-ons as well, haven't they, for the Business Premium?
Yeah, so that's correct. So what they've actually done is recently released what is in essence 3 additional add-ons, but the third one is made up of the 2 combined. So they've increased it with what is known as a Microsoft Defender Security add-on, which basically brings even further features and functionality for security. And they've stacked that with what is known as a Purview compliance add-on as well. So you can bring even more compliancy, reporting, and features of that nature into the Business Premium stack as well. So if you wanted to go even further than this with your security, there is another layer you can bring into that. And if you wanted to look at it from a compliance and governance perspective, there is another layer you can add on to that, to bring, again, even more features and functionality from that perspective also. This brings in things such as e-discovery premium, is one of the features that Purview piece brings in, which would allow you in these instances to be able to search for particular documents, particular phrases and references within your system for potential compliance reporting. Perhaps you need it for a potential legal case, and it will allow you to go looking for selective keywords, perhaps email addresses, perhaps an address, etc. Or if you've just got a request for information back from your customer, we want to know all the information you've got on us. Again, you can use eDiscovery, find those customer names, references, emails, etc., and do that search, get the information back and say, here's all the data we have on you as part of your request for information from us.
James, yeah, a lot to think about. So of course the recording will be sent over to you shortly. There's no questions that I can see, but if you think of any in the meantime, just get in touch with your account manager and I'm sure they'll be able to help you out. Otherwise, have a lovely rest of your day, everybody. Thank you very much.